Shalom Aleichem. Um, okay. Let me get the Tzadok up here. Second. Hi. Okay, so thank you for thank you for letting me you know you're on. I was wondering if you're actually on. Okay. Yeah, I think we're up to 90. Let me just share a screen here. It is actually a very important Reb Tzadok, 90 in the Tzaddik. Torah Mapas Olam. Torah is the map of the world. Mashkasa Rashis Rabbah, Reish Perak Aleph, like it says, beginning of Medrash Rabbah and Bereshis. But Marshall Difteros of Pinkasos, it's like the blueprints and the instruction manual for the world. So that's the Torah. That's well known from the Midrash. But this is Reb Tzaddik's Chiddush. V'chein Yisrael, the Jews also are the map of the world. In other words, it's not the Torah by itself, which is a very standard idea, but the Torah and its interaction with the Jewish people, that's the map and the blueprint of the world. Shein Barai Sochat Kanoida. And because Am Yisrael and the Torah are one. As we say, the famous saying, the Zohar, Yisrael are rights of Akucha Brichu Chadu. Yisrael, Torah, and Hashem are all unified. But here it's much more profound than just a superficial statement. The light of the nefashos of Am Yisrael is the light of Torah. Because of the Yeshishim Riba Oisias Torah, and that's why Chazal say that I don't know if it's a Chazal, but it's certainly well known drush that Yisrael is Rosh Tevos. It's an abbreviation for Yeshishim Riba Oisias Torah. That there's 600,000 layers of Torah. There aren't 600,000 layers of Torah. There are 350,000 or something like that. But there are various different ways of making the cheshbon work. But I don't think the cheshbon was meant to be literal in any event. It means that Am Yisrael and Torah, like Reb Tzadok is saying, are congruent. The Torah is rooted in the Neshamas of Am Yisrael, and the Neshamas of Am Yisrael rooted in the Torah. And therefore, although the word letters and words in the Torah are on one level the map, but the map has much greater details and much more profound nuances than just a very broad overview, which you would get from a very large, a very large scale, a very small scale, very large scale map. It's a no, I think it's a large, small scale map, very small scale map, very large scale map. That you're going to get much more details. For that, you have to go to Am Yisrael, not just the letters of the Torah. As they say, the map of the world in that generation is based on Am Yisrael in that generation. Just based on the new aspect of the nefashos of Am Yisrael in every generation, b'chol dor. So to the world of Jew at that time in that pattern. So if Am you can see if the world is a messed up place like it is today, it's because Am Yisrael is messed up. The world is a fixed place, it's because Am Yisrael is fixed. The world is functional, it's because Am Yisrael is functional. The world is dysfunctional, it's because Am Yisrael is dysfunctional. And he says, like it says, Spinos, even the boats which go between Spain and France, I think one of there says Aspamia and Surface and Aspamia. I don't remember what the exact lesson is. But even those boats which go like way out in the Atlantic Ocean, very far from Eretz Yisrael, they're Bishvil Yisrael. They're through on account of the Jews. And there's important idea from the Baal Shem Tov and from Ruchaim Voloshin, I think they both say, that Bishvil Yisrael is in the pathway, Bashivil, in the pathway of the Jews. And that means is that it says by Rabbi Chanina, the whole world is sustained through on account of Chanina, my son, and Chanina, my son. It's enough for him to have a measure of carobs to eat from Shabbos to Shabbos. So they both say, the Baal Shem Tov, the Reb Chaim Volozhin, they say b'shvil means not just on account of, which would be perhaps one meaning, but b'shvil, in the pathway. In other words, there are pipelines or pathways of shefa which come to the world, and those pipelines, if the tzaddikim, in the case of China, or Amisol, in the case which we'll tell you about here, and obviously at different levels, it's individuals, and the other levels, it's the nation. If we're functioning properly, then the pipelines are open; they're not clogged. But if we're not functioning properly, then the pipelines get clogged and stopped up. So the idea is that yes, individual people have their own merit and demerit, which also impacts upon the status of the world. And nations have their own merits and demerits, their own advantages and disadvantages, which impact on their status. But all of this is the pipeline itself. That's within the pipeline. The pipeline itself, whether it's functioning properly, not functioning properly, that's Am Yisrael. And if we function properly, then the pipes are open and they're flowing freely. If we're not functioning properly, then the pipes are clogged in various different ways, depending on what we're doing wrong. So that's the idea that all the shvilim, all the pathways come to the Jewish people. A commotion, nefashos mishtanos midor l'dor, just like the souls change in their character from generation to generation. Kena Torah, so the Torah changes. In other words, the Torah today is not the same Torah you had 100 years ago. And then it's because at a very simple level. The Torah before, let's say, Reb Chaim saw Brisker, or before Chazon Ish, or before Reb Yisrael Solanter, was not the same Torah as the Torah is today. The Torah is different. Torah changes. It certainly changes in the sense that things are added on, but also changes that new understandings are there, even for the old things. There are new understandings based on new approaches which develop in every generation. That's what he's saying. When just like the souls change generation, Kain Torah, so to Torah itself. Now, I Torah Sheba'al Peh. Of course, Torah Sheba'al is static, and Torah Sheba'al on one level is a map of the world, but that's again, like we said before, it's a very superficial level. What's beneath that, and the details upon the details, that's in Torah Sheba'al Peh, and that changes all the time. Which becomes renewed in every generation in a new way by the sages of Israel. And by all these new ideas and new pathways, all these new approaches in Torah Sheba'al Peh, means that new souls in Am Yisrael. Now, I don't know if he means literally new souls in the sense that they were not Gilgulim from past cycles. I think it means that they're oriented in a new way. Could be they're here in the past and oriented in a different way, but now that now in this generation, through the new Shefa, which comes down from Shamayim, every generation differently, they themselves are renewed. And through their renewal, they renew the world in a new way. And through this new concepts in the world come into being. And this, of course, is a very sad statement, but that's if it's sad, it's sad. From matzav olam b'chol dor, from the situation of the world in every generation. Nuchal izbon matzav nefashos zorosh b'dor. Let's understand the state of the souls in Am Yisrael. So if it's a generation full of war and strife, then Am Yisrael is full of war and strife. It's a generation full of chesed and kindness. So Am Yisrael is full of chesed and kindness. On some level, we can see reflected in the situation of the world, which is itself based on the map, which is Am Yisrael's interaction with Torah and mitzvahs. We can see what the situation is in that map. But it's a good situation or a bad situation. And also, you can tell how Torah is going to be learned by the true Talmidei Chacham in that generation. Right? This is it's an amazing statement because it says that you can tell how the world how people are learning based on what the world looks like. So I just want to give the very broad example, which is that some of the later authorities, Achronim, made fun of other Achronim, And they said that the yeshiva Shederech, the Focher of Chaim Brisker and other yeshiva, Rosh Yeshiva, is like chemistry or like science in general. And they had a valid point because it was a much more scientific, so to speak, approach, which developed in the late 19th century in Eastern Europe. And that approach found a parallel. It's not found. The parallel was there in the general world of the more scientific approach, which developed. So this idea of things developing over time in the world, and it works both ways. For Am Yisrael's internal status determines the situation of the world in general, and from the situation of the world in general, what can determine the internal status of Am Yisrael? So if you, obviously, the greater you are, the more perspective you have and how that works. But in generally speaking, that is, as the Tzadok says, you can tell what the status of the world is from Am Yisrael, what the status of Am Yisrael is from the world. Okay, therefore it says, if they, chagiga of the Eitzim Mibonim, if the children of Hashem, the Talmidei Chachamim, lose their counsel, then the Chachma of the Umas Olam also goes bad, the Chachma of the non-Jews, because it's linked to each other. Ayin Shem will move on, see that it's well understood. So the idea is that there's this linkage, which, and Tzadok says this in several other places, that a shefa comes down to the world. It manifests itself in one way by the Jews, based on Torah mitzvahs, and another way by the Goyim, based on their not having Torah mitzvahs, but it's the same shefa. And it comes down, just manifests itself differently. And what he's adding here is that shefa originates not from Hashem necessarily directly. It originates from the Jewish people and their relationship with Torah. And then that shefa also comes down to the nations of the world in a similar manner and creates this new, at least in a spiritual sense, this new society based on the Torah and Tzadok and how we relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, etc. So I think elsewhere, if I'm not mistaken, if I could be mistaken, but Tzadok also speaks about how, if you have a new island, a physical change in the world, because a volcano erupts, it could be because somebody said a tremendous chiddush. And a tremendous chiddush was like a volcano erupting. And then, in turn, in the physical world, the volcano erupted and created a new island. But he doesn't say that here. I seem to remember that was somewhere else, and could be I'm mistaken. But that the Torah is the map of the world, not just in the society, in the social sense, in the intellectual sense, in terms of politics, etc., but even in the physical world itself. Okay, but in any event, that's the fundamental principle. Torah, mapas olam, Torah is the map of the world. Now, the next one is related, because it speaks about the relationship between a person and his property. And we had this before already. It could be this was what I was referring to a moment ago. This other, I think so. Yeah, I think so. That is referring to the relationship between Am Yisrael and the physical world. The piece you're just referring to is Am Yisrael and the spiritual, social, and political world, etc., etc. But here he says, anything a person possesses. So we had this a couple of simanim ago, the same idea. It's part of his life force, which extends to the creatures he possesses. There's the Torah's created Bereshis for Am Yisrael, which is called Reshis. So again, Bishvil, right? Bashvil Yisrael. And it says, Kosh Baruch renews the Bria every day. And every day, the renewal is on account of Am Yisrael. And this he didn't say explicitly before, but here he says it. Every part of the world is connected to some specific soul of Am Yisrael. It's meaning to say, the light of his life force, who sustains those creatures. From his good deeds, from that is sustained the good creatures and the pure creatures. That's from his good deeds. And from his thoughts, and his desires, he sustains malachim and spiritual forces. Some are good, some are bad. They're malachim chabola, malachim mashchisim, the destructive malachim. Those are sustained from his thoughts. So from his deeds, he sustains the creatures in this world, the physical creatures. From his thoughts and his desires, he sustains the spiritual creatures. Meroim, that was from the positive deeds. From the bad ones, Nasi Meroim, you come out with bad creatures. And similar to that, it says in Erevin that if a person has an emission, so that creates ruchos v'shidin v'lilin, rushul, ruchos, a demon, the various different types of negative spirits and demons and male and female. She, male demons, female demons. So similar to that, right? That from Tzadok that's created, which Tzadok says clearly is a spiritual thing, but also in a physical way. Hachayos hamazikos, animals which damage v'chein akum harotzchim. And so too, non-Jews are murderers, because Tzadok calls them murderers. Non-Jews or murder really have no free will. There's a thing where Tzadok says elsewhere. It says that, and this in Hasidus, it's a big thing to diminish the amount of free will which non-Jews have, which I don't like, I'm not comfortable with, but that's the way they thought, and that's the way they held, and we can't do much about it. Reality is they held that way. So therefore he says, if they're akum, rotzchim, they're murderous non-Jews, it's because the Jews are murderous. We embarrass people in public, or we taunt people, other things like that. We create murderers. And it also creates negative inanimate objects, negative solid objects, like emech niskaba, the fact that there's a stone which was somebody was stoned, even though he had to be stoned. And there's a tree from which somebody was hanged after he was stoned, because you're supposed to hang him up. That also is created from our negative deeds, not necessarily from the person who did the wrong deed, but for the fact that we do bad things, it creates negative creatures and negative inanimate objects. This is the secret that which Chazal say, Ton of Elio. It says Kosh Baruch is eventually going to take retribution. It's going to punish everything, even the stone with which a person was stoned. So it says himself, what does that mean? The stone is an inanimate object. No, but somebody was responsible for that stone being able to be used to stone somebody, and not just the person who committed a sin. Another person to whom this stone had a connection, and had he been a bigger tzaddik, the stones which are connected to him would not have been able to use for the purpose of stoning somebody. It's an amazing statement. It says the sinners will be pursued by the wicked they allowed to exist, because their sins allowed their wickedness to exist. K'mosh says, "V'anochi barasim hashchis l'chabel." I created a spiritual power to destroy. And the I think here he's talking about. Well, he explains. Hashem says, I'm going to make a fire come out from the body of the Rishonim themselves. And burn them up. In other words, you create that fire yourself. Hashem's not punishing you. You're punishing yourself because you created that capacity for that fire. And it's not just because mida connected mida you sin, but rather you created that fire with your sin. And he takes it even further. He says, by plants, by the fact that there are poisons in the world, that is also our fault. Even fact that they're poisons comes from our not conducting ourselves properly. Amazing, right? And to the extent the distance of the extension of his light and his life force in them is correlated to how they are related to him. So in other words, your light is very powerful on certain things and much dimmer on other things. Why the difference, or how the difference? There's certain things which you actually own, and there your light is very strong, and your power for darkness is very strong as well. Some things you own them for a short amount of time and you sold them, and your connection to them was temporary, but that time when you were connected to them also had an impact upon them. There's some things which you only borrow or rented out. More for a short amount of time. And even there are things you have a connection with, just the way you saw them by other people. That too, the fact that you saw them by other people, I saw your pen, right? You saw my book. That also is a connection. Of course, there are other people connected to that as well, but that also is a connection, and I have an influence on it, and it has an influence on me. Um, oh, nistakabem, midday over, even looked at them, just gazed and glanced at them while you're passing by, Bezim someplace. Umem shalo rami yamav, and there's things which you have a connection to, which you never saw in your entire life. You just wanted them in your thoughts. So there are levels with infinite amount of levels. Somebody who understands these things, which of course not me or you, Yuchal Das can know these bonain and to pay careful attention, ulisakein, and fix kol ela. He can fix things, even with things we just sees, even things he just thinks of. He can fix them, right? Vatikun, and what's the tikkun which he does? It's by even your thoughts, just returning them to their source. That everything, all this comes from the life force that Hashem puts in them, that sustains them. And gives them life and sustains them. And not, they wouldn't exist. So by thinking about everything I own, I come into contact with, I even think about, it's Hashem's, and Hashem put a life force into it. Hashem wants it to do its purpose. That is how it fixes it. So that's the secret of Mashkasa Beish's Rabbah Bergan Gimel. Shel Yaakov Shishim Ribo Edritzo. Yaakov had 600,000 herd of sheep. Now, again, it's not necessarily literal. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but that's not the point. But rather, Ki Nafshoy Sokolel Shishim Ribo Nafshos Yisrael. Since the soul of Yaakov Avinu included 600,000 Jews who eventually come out. Question: every object event, including stumbling blocks of extension, was a shaman's portion of creation. Doesn't imply that even transgression is preordained, especially that portion. I know preordained. Yes, I mean if a person does transgress, so that also is an expression of that portion. So how can human accountability and free will be reconciled with such total predetermination? It's not total. It means you have an impact on it; it has an impact on you. But there's free will also. It's limited, more limited free will because of all the impact. But everybody's free will is limited by who they are, where they are, what they come into contact with. So free will is not as free as we think it is. It's not unbridled, unlimited free will. Every will works within narrow confines of this here to there. Maybe sometimes more, sometimes less. But all free will is constricted by the conditions under which it operates. Okay, so the and each one corresponded to its later generations which came out of it. The Shishimibo generations, the 600,000 Jews in the Midbar, each one corresponded to all the generations which come out of it eventually. So at that point, they didn't exist. So then at that point, the parts of his soul, Yaakov's soul, which correspond to all those people going to later exist, during his lifetime, they correspond to 600,000 sheep. Shubei Matera, right? So, which is a kosher animal. Because it was still on the level of Yaakov. Shumadregas Amar Oretz, which is the level of Amei Oretz. The Yaakov is corresponds to Amei Oretz, Yisrael to Talmidei Chachamim, or higher people, K'mashkas Mitzios. And also Am Yisrael is like the sheep. So all these things he's putting together to say that these sheep represent Am Yisrael on a level before they are fully formed, before they're fully educated, before they're great Talmidei Chachamim. And Yaakov Avinu's avodah with his sheep corresponded to avodah, which later on manifest itself in his children and descendants. Because I'll say Maisa of a similar bunny. So many ways of understanding that, but what the deeds of the Avos did in the things with which they operated, that actually had impact for all generations later on. Doesn't deprive the later generations of their own free will, but again within the confines of what the Avos put into place. Vayakin Yono, and they belonged to him. She inspires him. He got his sustenance for them. Kimashu Parnasa saw them, and here it says another Yisod that which is the thing from which a person gets is Parnasa. Sham Ganas Ikar Chiyusa. His primary life force is Shu Area Parnasa Ikar Kim Chiyusa, because his Parnasa is his primary life sustaining force. So therefore, your parnasa should be a reflection of you. That's why people, if you do job counseling, you should counsel somebody to take a job which reflects their personality. And their job should reflect their personality, and their personality should reflect the job. Ideally speaking. It doesn't always work that way, of course, because that is your primary life force is in the thing in which you are supporting yourself. And it should be something which is appropriate. Lechein Isa, therefore it says, Bira the shasis mine maya, Warba Kama. Saibei says, if you drank water from a well, lo tishtei bekala, don't throw in it a clump of dirt. She'en lebazoso, don't embarrass, don't degrade it by doing that. On several levels, that's true. First, since your parnas was there from there, you got drank from there. Your neshama is connected to it, and since it's you drink from there, it means there's a connection to your neshama. So, like all the property, which you said before, it even doesn't belong to you. So, therefore, treat it properly. And that avoda in those things which you have a connection to. So, the musar for it is that it makes the bigger about musar to treat it properly. You have a karas to an inanimate object, an object which is not doesn't have a soul, because you're supposed to have a karas and it makes you a good person to have makar stove even to a stone or to a body of water. But that's not what Tzadok is saying. Tzadok is going to the Hasidic approach. Hasidic approach is that there's kedusha there, and that kedusha is uplifted by your treating it properly, and that kedusha is intrinsically connected to you. It was connected to you for a reason. It was given to you that you should treat it properly in order to uplift that kedusha in it, which is called Kabbalah halas and Itzaitis, uplifting the sparks. Right? She'en levazos says you should not degrade it, but rather use it properly. There's no place to specify this further, but these are two very basic and fundamental and great pieces. Okay, stop here for today. We'll see about Sunday. Since the fast day, we'll talk. We'll see if we're able to learn. Anytime, have a great Shabbos. Take care.